Hello everyone, Dr. Christine Smith back for a cool interview today with Dr. Kelly McCann, where we're going to be talking about Mast Cell Activation Syndrome and how this actually can be connected to your mindset as well as environmental toxins and a number of other things. And I wanted to discuss this because I think it's something not a lot of people know or understand. And it can be very helpful to know things that you can do in the situation, because if anyone has ever been through mast cell activation syndrome, it is not the most pleasant experience and it can be a little bit hard. So hello, Dr. McCann. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. How are you?
Hello, Christine. It seems like we need more light here. There we go.
Oh, good. Well, so good to see you. I was just telling everyone just a little bit about some of the stuff we'll be talking about today, and just like a little bit about mast cell activation syndrome, which is something not everybody knows about, but at some point we may have experienced some bit of it along the spectrum, depending on what goes on in our life. But I'd love if you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you have ended up in the niche that you have and what you've found most interesting working with lately.
Okay, let's see. You know, I started out always wanting to do holistic functional medicine, but it wasn't functional medicine when I was in medical school, right? It was holistic medicine. Did integrative medicine, eventually functional medicine. And along the way, realized that I wanted to know as much as I could about as many things as possible. I had a mentor who taught me all about environmental medicine. That was Dr. Walter Crinian. And I'm so grateful for him and all of my colleagues along the way who taught me so much about the environment and how it can really impact our health. From there, I investigated mold. Dr. Richie Shoemaker, realized that Shoemaker had one way, which was his way, and that was not the only way, that people needed to get better. And then investigated Lyme and ended up with very sensitive patients and had to learn about mast cell activation, mostly from Dr. Lawrence Afrin, to whom I am really grateful. And I think the things that I've learned most recently that I've really loved is that it's all the things, right? We can't do just one thing. We have to do, we have to address the upset mast cells, which we can talk more about, and calm them down. We have to address the nervous system, which is getting dysfunctional and dysregulated. And then we have to address our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, how we talk to ourselves, because those things really impact how we live the rest of our lives, how our immune systems function as a boundary between ourselves and the outside world. And so it's a process, it's a journey. And I love walking this journey with patients because it's so powerful. And not only do people get better, they become better versions of themselves, right? It's not just about that physical healing. It's about emotional, spiritual healing and finding joy.
Absolutely. And I think you said it so well of like, it's a journey. Anytime we go through a health crisis or a health issue, there's a little bit of like an identity crisis that goes with it. Usually means that there's something we're kind of incongruent with in our life, whether that is an emotional thing or a way that we're approaching our lifestyle and our body can't keep up. And so it is a time that requires sometimes some difficult self-reflection. And so out of that, the hidden gift in that is that you can really evolve into the next version of yourself, which can be quite beautiful. So I know you've worked with a lot of people who have dealt with this, and you know, mast cell activation syndrome is basically a piece of what's going on in the body. And I think helping people to understand that, and just like you said, it's kind of like the compounding of it all. I talk a lot about allostatic load, which is our body's capacity for what we're dealing with. And we have capacity for physical issues, we have capacity for chemical issues and emotional, mental issues, and stress, essentially. Those are all different kinds of stress. And if we have extra stress in one area, say an environmental toxin exposure that causes us to then have some hyperimmune activity, we're probably not going to be as emotionally resilient as we were previously, which can be some of the challenges that come along with this, and something that isn't always acknowledged that people are going through. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about this too, is just to bring awareness to that, so that if you're going through it or someone you know is going through it, there can be some compassion in this realm. But in all of the cases that you worked with, like, let's discuss a little bit about the role of mast cell reaction and what is the body doing when it's doing this.
Sure. So mast cells, they get a bad rap, right? But they're really, really important. And their job is to fight foreign invaders for us. They've been around for, I don't know, 50 million years or something. It's been a really long time. And they are constantly surveilling the body's interfaces between ourselves and the outside world, looking for foreign invaders. And when they perceive a threat, they will degranulate. They dump all these inflammatory mediators in our bodies, things like histamine and prostaglandins, cytokines, chemokines. We know now about the cytokine storm. So that's kind of what happens. And it can happen at a small level, it can happen on a systemic level, and it's going to cause symptoms. And those symptoms are the signal to help bring inflammatory mediators and other white blood cells and other parts of the immune system in to fight whatever foreign invader is there. And that's their job. It just so happens that in about 20, who knows, maybe 25% of the patients or people, those mast cells get a little rogue. And they start perceiving threats where there may not be any, and they start dumping all their inflammatory mediators at inappropriate times, like when you eat foods that normally you had been eating, or you have too much pressure, or you see light, or just about anything. all the things that people develop sensitivities and reactions to. And so when that's happening, the mast cells are trying their best to do their job, right? They just have the wrong directions. And so sometimes we have to rewire them and calm them down. And that's really one of the first steps in working with patients when they come in. And, they're working with us as doctors. They want to feel better. They are coming in for physical issues, right? But it's not just about the physical issues, and I think that that's the important part. So when we work with people, I have to build that trust, have to build that relationship, and start to help people understand that they can get better physically, and then we get to do all this mental, emotional work too.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the mental emotional work is so much bigger than people realize, especially with something like this. Because one of the other things that I'll find with mast cell activation syndrome is it's often tied to what I call like rhythm dysregulation. So the rhythm in your body is a little bit out of sync, and that can be your adrenals and your hormones and the HPA axis. So it's like the signals that your body are sending are just a little bit dysregulated, and this affects things like the release of our cytokines and our immune function and how our cells repair and clean themselves. So in this, it can be really tied to pushing yourself beyond your boundaries or pushing yourself beyond your capacity, and realizing what that is, and realizing that capacity can change over time, and it depends on what's going on in your life. And we're talking about how mast cells can get activated through essentially toxic exposure, but that toxic exposure can be an environmental exposure, and it can also be a emotionally stressful toxic exposure. So maybe the emotional environment that you're in, or how you're perceiving that environment. And I add in how we're perceiving it, because sometimes it's the environment itself that's toxic, and sometimes it's our mindset around it that's toxic. And those things, that stress, can really start to affect how your immune system functions, because if our thoughts are inflamed and defensive and worried and fear and feeling like prey, our immune system is going to be in the same state, and it's going to be on a hyper defensive type of state. And then if we add something like an environmental exposure on top of that, like mold or chemicals or something like that, heavy metals, then all of a sudden we hit this breaking point and our system just kind of gets confused. So I know, like, with this, how do you like to approach the mindset of holistic healing in something like a chronic infection, and really your perspective ranging from medicine. And I also know you do like medical acupuncture and you've studied a lot of different things. Like, what is the holistic mindset and approach to a situation like this for people?
Obviously, it has to be personalized and tailored to each person, to each individual, and that's the art, right? It's me having a perception and an intuition that the person might be ready to have this conversation. You know, I often start by reminding people that our bodies are doing everything that they can in their capacity to help protect us, right? To take care of us. And I think we have a perception in our Western culture sometimes that our bodies are against us if it doesn't do the things that we want it to do. Like, I want to be tall, thin, and, you know, in shape, and I want to be able to do all these things. And if I can't do that, my body is against me. Rather than recognize that we have this intimate, loving, nurturing relationship with our bodies. And if our bodies are giving us messages of dysregulation and dysfunction, then maybe we should reframe how we're thinking about what the messages are. So rather than saying, my body is broken, it's falling apart, it's like totally dysfunctional, maybe we should say, okay, what is it trying to tell me that I'm really not listening to? And why does it have to scream at me? Because I missed the messages earlier on when I could have listened, but I wasn't listening, right? And I think the longer people are struggling with chronic illness, sometimes the more detached we get from our own intuitions, and the louder and louder our bodies have to scream, right? If our intuition, if our being, our soul, whatever we want to call that aspect of ourselves, that deeper aspect of ourselves, is trying to communicate with us, the only way that it can do it is through the body, right? And therefore, we have to learn the language of the body. What does it mean when things get dysfunctional? What is the language? And this is where I love using things like traditional Chinese medicine and the metaphors from traditional Chinese medicine, or the metaphors from the chakra system. And there's so many different energetic systems that have been around for millennia that we can tap into to help us understand some of the metaphors. And then of course there's, you know, Louise Hay and people who are more contemporary who have talked about metaphors of the body for a long time as well. And then exploring what that means. So if somebody has a headache, you know, that could be suppressed anger, that could be a, you know, disconnection with the thoughts and emotions, that could be many different things. And so we can use these these tools, these frameworks to help each person start to understand the language of their own body.
Well, and that's huge, because when we can start to listen to our body, we take all of our power back. And so I think like one of the things that's happening in our healthcare system is it's been turned into a completely victim mindset model where you are broken and you have to be fixed by something from the outside, and that is your only choice and nothing else will work. And anything that's that black and white thinking, I find usually has a couple hiccups in there somewhere. But I think you had mentioned earlier when we were chatting, like this can be a bit of a spiritual journey. And yeah, that goes back to that kind of identity crisis we talked about at the beginning. And so in all this, like, what have you seen in what you kind of refer to as the spiritual journey?
You know, I think when people struggle with chronic illness, they lose that connection with themselves. They lose that connection with their joy, with their creativity, with their with the who they are actually, and how they want to express in the world. You know, I really think the universal truths of all the major spiritual teachings is about love and knowing yourself, right? So if you know yourself, if you love yourself, and you're able to express that love to the world, that's what we're here to do. That's what brings us joy. And so the spiritual journey that happens is using illness as an opportunity to reconnect with oneself, to reconnect with what brings us joy, to reconnect with what brings us meaning, and to teach us, since we probably don't know it yet, how to love, honor ourselves, right? And I think that that's what it's all about. And so what I find ends up happening with a lot of patients is just empowering them to take that control back, first of the physical body, right? Because people have to feel better in order to be able to, contemplate broader things in the life. But then as people start to feel better, then we can have these conversations like, okay, tell me a little bit about this. Let's explore this. And, I teach people how to muscle test so that they can start to have ownership. I don't do the muscle testing for them. I really encourage them to do the muscle testing as much as possible, to start to have that connection with themselves, to start to feel empowered again. And there's so many tools and programs out there, but the truth is, like, no program is going to fix you. No tool or supplement is going to fix you. You have to find the things that you resonate with, that enable you to reconnect to yourself.
Yes, I could not agree with that more. And I know when I was going through my own healing journey, I was working with a bunch of wonderful practitioners and everyone was trying their best, but my body was just in a place where it was like, no supplements right now, none of these things. Like, you need to sit here and meditate and drink water and sleep and eat these 4 foods. And that's what I need you to do. And I finally surrendered, and like that surrender and just being like, okay, like, this is what my body's doing. This is what we have to do right now. And asking for help when I needed to, and rearranging my life until my body could catch back up and heal, because our bodies are amazing. Like, they're filled with innate intelligence. They are designed to heal. It's just sometimes they need time and peace and nourishment. And that nourishment can come in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it's not going to come from the environment that you got sick in. You have to change your environment in some way. And that's kind of the whole idea behind a lot of the meditative practices, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, is you are internally, mentally changing your environment. And if you can mentally change your environment, then you start to chemically, internally change your own body environment. So I love this idea of that journey. And I think what you said at the beginning of, people just are losing their connection to self and to joy and to expression of what they love, and that identity crisis that might come with all of a sudden you're ill and you can't do the things that used to bring you joy, and now you have to find other things. That is a journey in itself. And I think, if there's anything I realized from my own healing journey, it was that it had a lot less to do with trying to figure out the story of where everything came from, and a lot more to do with letting it go and focusing on remembering all the things it made me forget, which was how to be joyful and how to be present and how to be grateful and enjoy my life and all of those things, which is a practice, ironically. Like, you think it should come naturally to us, but really the thing that comes the most natural to us is stress, because it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. So joy and happiness takes some effort, because you have to overcome the stress that is the go-to for our body's survival. And if we can understand that, then you start to give yourself a little bit of a break, where you're like, why do I have to meditate more than this other person to function in my life? And you're like, oh, it's because my system needs more regulation at this time. And then when you realize that, it's just like, well, you have to, if you're dealing with weight gain, you have to go to the gym more often than the person that's not dealing with weight gain. But usually the people that don't deal with weight gain are at the gym more often. So if you can go to the mental gym more often, then you might not get stuck in these mindsets of feeling so poorly. And so I think that was one of the next questions I wanted to ask, is like, how do you like to approach the mindset for people dealing with chronic illness brain. I'm going to say that, like, it's just a thing. Like, when you are dealing with chronic illness or infection or environmental exposure, your neurology changes at that time, and you're dealing with different biochemistry because your inflammatory pathways are on, and it's shifting the way your neurotransmitters are presenting. So it is a thing where you're less motivated, you are more emotional, you're more reactive, you have less resilience, and it's just something that we experience. But it can lead to kind of, one, a little bit of like a victim mindset. I get it, it has a role, but it usually doesn't serve us that well in this life. Like, if we can shift out of that and see anything traumatic that we go through as something that we can pull a lesson out of, that's how a lot of the subconscious reprogramming techniques work. And then also this thing that can kind of happen after you go through a medical experience like this, of you can accidentally create an attachment to your illness identity, especially if you go through that identity crisis, and then it's really hard to think of yourself as healthy again. Or if anything medical comes up, you get triggered and scared and feel like a whole illness has come back, when really it's like you have a headache and you should drink some water. And so how do you work with people in kind of the trauma brain that can come with the chronic illness brain?
Some good questions. I think one of the most powerful tools is the reframe. It's just encouraging people to consider it from a different perspective, right? And then continuing to do that. So if you find yourself going down this pathway of believing a certain thing or thinking a certain thing, and then offering the possibility of, well, maybe that's not true. Maybe there's another way that we can think about it, another way that we can language it, and really bringing awareness to our languaging and how we talk about things, I think is super important. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. But I do think that that's super important. And then I have a lot of other practitioners that I refer to, or other books that I refer to. Like, I love Amy Scher. I think Amy Scher is amazing, and have referred to her book, How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, because then she has those tools to really say, okay, what are the things that I'm telling myself, and how do I reconfigure them, and what are the beliefs that I have? What are the underlying falsehoods that I'm attached to that I really need to shift in my life? And then deconstructing those. And you can do that with tapping. You can do that with a variety of different modalities. But I do find that with meditative practices and finding that space in between those thoughts, that's when you start to make an inroads and shift things for yourself and for other people, and helping them move towards where they want to be. I did want to say, in the cancer community, many people have this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, I just got diagnosed with cancer. I have to change, right? I have to change my life. And it's this shock value that enables people to go, okay, I'm going to do a 180. I'm going to do a 360. I'm going to now do all the things that I wasn't doing before, wasn't paying attention before. But with chronic illness, it's this slow decline over time where we start to lose aspects of ourselves, lose things that we love to do, activities, foods, etc., ability to go different places. So we don't have that shock value. I have a diagnosis of something that is life-threatening, right? So, and yet the opportunity is exactly the same. So we just need to harness that okay, this slow decline isn't what I want anymore. I want something different. I mean, oftentimes people will say, I want my life back, but I think, like you said, we don't want to go back to where we were before, because obviously where we were before, our patterns, our beliefs, our habits weren't serving us. And that's the whole reason that we're here in the first place. So I want something more. I want something deeper. I want something more connective. I want something from the heart. That's really a full expression of who we are. And that's where we want to get to. And sometimes it simply takes an awareness of the possibilities, that we don't have to keep on this decline, right? There are ways out.
Definitely. And I think, when you're mentioning, people are like, I just want my life back. And that slow decline that you experience, it can be really tough because you feel like you're losing all your simple pleasures. Especially it's like when you have to, stop drinking beverages that is like your morning beverage, or stop eating foods that are just like the thing that you do to treat yourself when you're feeling stressed. We have to start to shift our mind and like how we reward ourselves. And I think one of the things that can come from that is loss of trust in the universe. And one of the big pieces of spirit of you just lost trust in yourself and in your body. And usually during this time, you've experienced some kind of social disruption with other people. And so you've kind of lost trust in others. And then you kind of have lost trust in the universe because all of this has been happening. And I remember when I was thinking through that process, it's like you can't always trust yourself to make the right decisions because that's impossible. And you can't always rely on other people to fulfill everything that you need because that's impossible. And this is also just something that's in flow and isn't necessarily like malicious for you. And if we can see it from that perspective, then all of a sudden we realize when we're asking where we can place our trust, it's that you can place it in your own resiliency and your ability to get back up and your ability to recover and to overcome whatever you're dealing with. And that is that unshakable place that you can place your trust, because if you are here, you have made it through every single other hardship that you've been through. So that is a very good place to find that again. And then just by starting to trust your own resiliency, you start to be able to trust the universe again and trust those small pleasures and trust your decisions in as you're moving forward. So just wanted to throw that out there as a concept for people, because I think that's one of the more esoteric places our mind can go when we're dealing with stuff like this, and not everybody talks about it. So I think it can be a really helpful thing. And I know, in this, we're talking about environmental exposures, we talked about stress, but that environmental exposure can also be, something more than just a mold exposure. It could be a bacterial infection, it could be a viral infection, basically anything that causes your body to go into like a massive immune response, which is basically, helpful because your body is protecting you, but it's this wave of battlefield damage going through all of your tissues as a systemic effect. And then our body has to deal with that cleanup and deal with the debris, even if we won the battle. And then that is sometimes where people will get stuck in this kind of lingering dysregulation after an experience like that. So I know like in your work, you've found that people will deal with cardiovascular irritation after these things. What are some of the approaches that you take, or some of the things that you've seen, or just some of the things that you want people to know around
that? So we're talking about heart damage potentially due to all of these environmental chemicals, maybe mold exposure. And, I think that there's a lot of fallout from stuff like this. We know that heavy metals can cause cardiovascular disease, especially lead and cadmium. We know that mold can cause cardiovascular disease. And the things that I would do, actually, one of my favorite things for most environmental toxic exposures is phosphatidylcholine. Are you familiar? Yes. I love PC. It's an amazing little molecule. For those of you who are not familiar with phosphatidylcholine, it is one of the building blocks of our cell membrane. So if you remember back to cell biology, and we had a lipid bilayer, there it is, the lipid bilayer. Here's my lipid bilayer, the inside of my cells and the outside of my cells. On the outside of the cell is phosphatidylcholine. We have other, what we call phospholipids on the inside of the cell. But PC is so amazing because it can mobilize the toxins, whether it's a heavy metal, other chemical. So here's my visual. My pen is the mold toxin sitting in my cell. And if you take PC, it will pull off the mold toxin, heal the cell, and then the environmental toxin, my pen, will eventually make its way through the lymphatic system to the liver, the gallbladder, and hopefully dump in the gastrointestinal system and be escorted out if you're taking binders, right? So PC is fantastic for that. It's a very safe and gentle way to enhance chelation, which is the removal of the metals as well. It can be administered IV or oral. And of course, there's many other things that we do along with phosphatidylcholine, but that's one of my favorites because it's been around for decades. There's no toxic effects. I just love PC.
I use it all the time, and I think people forget, like, not only are your cells made of it, it's also really helpful for your liver and for your bile, and just not only mobilizing things out of the cells, just like you were mentioning, but actually moving it through the liver and into our excretion system so we can get it out of the body. But that's a really common one. I think whenever someone's dealing with a hypersensitivity, I really like to focus on foundational cellular components. And if you are dealing with a lot of sensitivity, you're probably not the person who's going to tolerate a mixed supplement very well. Like, it's usually that you need to start with individual ingredients at a time at a significantly lower dose than the recommended dosage, and slowly moving yourself up while listening to your body the whole time. And it's tough when you're in those cases where you're super sensitive. It is tough. And if you're in that place where your body literally won't tolerate anything, you probably need to start with some nervous system regulation and some meditation. And if you're like, I can't meditate, I can't do any of these things, I am broken, then work with a body worker and like have someone help you reset your nervous system physically and go in the reverse, go from the body first up to the mind. And then when your mind is cooperating more, then you can start to meditate. And as you start to meditate, you start to tell your immune system to become more tolerant. And then you can actually start to integrate nutrition. For anyone who came in late and was asking what's PC, it's phosphatidylcholine. You can think of it like there's a lot of different versions of it, but choline itself is one of those things where, it's so important that if a woman doesn't have enough of it in pregnancy, she'll miscarry because our bodies are made of a significant amount of choline. So that's just a foundational nutrient. But as she said, it can stimulate some detox. So as always, this is just educational. Please ask your practitioner on what's right for you. But that's just one of many. Are there any other things that you really like to work with or that can really help in some of the just lingering irritation that our bodies can deal with after an exposure of some kind?
That's one of the biggest ones for sure. It's so personalized and individualized. I do use a product called Endocalix Pro. There's another one called Arterosil. That's more for the cardiovascular support. Anything that's going to help support nitric oxide production. So that could be arginine, citrulline, if we're talking about cardiovascular stuff. If we're talking about mast cell, oh gosh, the list is like super, super long. There are some pharmaceuticals, of course, that I find really helpful, like cromolyn and ketotifen. I'll use H1 blockers and H2 blockers, things like Zyrtec, Claritin, Allegra. Famotidine is an H2 blocker, Benadryl, hydroxyzine, depending upon the person and what they tend to respond well to. And then there are so many supplements. You can use low histamine probiotics, quercetin, luteolin. I love pyramine and pycnogenol. Those are some of my favorites, particularly for pycnogenol is good for so many different things. It's really pretty amazing for cardiovascular stuff too. And let's see, some of the other ones. Resveratrol, turmeric, of course. Those are going to be good cardiovascular protectives too. And the thing that's, challenging for the individuals is that you need to find the right combination for you. And so it's really, unless you're doing muscle testing or working with somebody who can help you learn how to muscle test, it is a lot of trial and error, and it takes time to find the right combination of things that manifest in improvements in your symptoms, but it's completely worth it. If you are able to muscle test, I do find that streamlines things a little bit. So you're able to figure out in a sea of 75 different things what, 5 or 10 you should probably start with. And then hopefully as the mast cells get calmed down, as the chronic lingering symptoms calm down, as you're working on your nervous system and your beliefs and things like that, working on your past traumas, everything will start to improve, and then you can let some of those supplements fall away. You don't need them forever. That's not the intention.
Yes, I'm so glad that you said that. And I think that's huge. And I love that you use muscle testing and you teach people muscle testing. I think it is so undervalued. And it's funny because, the community would be like, oh, that's more of a subjective measure. I'm like, well, kind of, but it's also a neurological response. So really it's neurological testing to see how well your body responds to something before you put it inside your body. So why would we not use this in addition to our objective measures like lab testing? Because lab testing also has its holes, and it's a moment in time. And sometimes your body might want something one day and then not want it the next day. So if all of a sudden you were, doing really well with choline and you were using it, but it loosened up some toxins, and then your body's like, wait, I need to catch up. It may mean that you might not want to take choline that day, right? So it's a way that you can ask your body questions as you're going along to listen to the dynamic process that is our biochemistry. And I think that's one of the other things I'll address, because, everything that we listed, you need to talk to your practitioner about and see if it's right for you, because order of operations matters. It really, really matters. If you start detoxing someone and they're not ready to detox and their detox pathways aren't open and they're not able to move it, you can actually make them worse, and you can make yourself worse. So especially when you're sensitive, and I know when you're sensitive, you're like desperate and you just want it to be over, more is not always better. In fact, sometimes it can be harmful. So order of operations is really important. If you're like, I have no idea where to start, but I feel like I'm dealing with this, binders are usually a good place to start, because it starts kind of picking up debris out of the system. But you also have to know that they pull minerals out of your system. So you have to remineralize your system as well. So if you're working with binders, you need to also be working with minerals in the right amounts, this is where you can talk to a practitioner and get some help. And then when you start moving some of the debris out of the street, now we can start kind of opening up the detox pathways in the street, but we have to do them backwards. We have to go in reverse. We can't start with phase 1. We have to start with phase 3 and then phase 2. And then that way, when you open phase 1, which is the more toxic phase of detox in your liver, it can actually move through the system. Then when we start to get that moving, then we can start to do some deeper work, and you'll see your body becoming more and more tolerant as you go through this work. But if you've been really sensitive or you're in a really bad place, this can take months or a year or a couple years. And I know, sorry, that's a hard truth, but it also gives you some understanding that it's a process, and it gives you a little bit of forgiveness for your body, and it lets you move at a speed and a tempo that's right for you. And it looks like you have a couple thoughts on that, so add whatever you want to add.
Oh yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. The longer that you have been struggling, most of the time, the longer it will take to heal. And it doesn't have to be that way. I've had some people turn the ship around, and in 6 months they're like, I had one woman, she's moving to Europe. she got her life back. She felt amazing, right? That's unusual. Usually it's more like 18 months kind of plus for most people. And
you have to get out of your toxic environment as well.
Oh yeah.
So because surprisingly, I've had this go under the radar, even with practitioners. If you're dealing with toxicity, you have to get out of your toxic environment, or you have to remediate it or remove it in some way. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it is very difficult to look at your situation, especially if it's mold, and think, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I've moved twice. Well, I've moved many times. I've moved like 20 times in the past 20 years, but for mold most recently, and I got rid of nearly all of my belongings, right? It sucked. There's no way to sugarcoat that. It's awful. And yet it was the only way that I was going to get better, that my family was going to get better, is if we did that amount of stuff. Now, does that mean everybody has to do it? Not necessarily, but you do have to clean up your environment. You do have to get out of a toxic environment, whatever that looks like. A couple of other thoughts on what you shared, Dr. Christine. Sometimes binders can really push mast cell patients over the edge and flare psychiatric symptoms, all sorts of symptoms. And so be very, very cautious. The more sensitive you are, most of my super sensitive patients are opening up capsules and they're taking pinches of things every couple of days, depending upon how sensitive. Sometimes we have to do compounded medications to get people started because they're super clean. And yes, absolutely single ingredients to start. You know, I actually don't often start with binders. I do find that many times the mast cell patients can't tolerate the binders. And so we'll start with, sometimes we have to start with drainage remedies and like picana and, you know, working on a homeopathic level. And sometimes we just have to start with food and trying to do some immunotherapy to help calm down the immune system. Things like low-dose allergy therapy, which is taught by the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. I love LDA. I do start with a lot of PC. And then the single ingredient things for mast cell activation. And this goes for whether you're dealing with a post-viral illness, post-Lyme, post-Lyme illness, or chronic bacterial infection, or mold exposure, or other environmental toxicant exposure.
Beautiful. And thank you for correcting me. Yes, you are right. Like sometimes people can respond poorly to binders. I've even had people respond terribly to glycine and choline and magnesium, which are foundational things for your body's function. And if your body is in that much of a dysregulated state, it's just like she said, like it's going to be very, very slow, very small doses, sometimes spaced out over days, preferably with a practitioner watching your case and consulting with you and seeing how you react. So it's different for everybody because surprisingly, that person who couldn't tolerate choline did tolerate the binders. And then the person who couldn't tolerate magnesium did okay after we did a couple doses of it and a couple rounds because her body had just been functioning without it for so long that I kind of surprised the system when it got it back. So this is why if you're a really complex case, this is why reaching out to a practitioner can be very helpful. But as we kind of come to tying this all up, what are just some of the things that you wish people knew coming into your office?
Gosh, that's a good one. I mean, I have to admit, I love my patients. Most of them are so committed to their health. They have really done the research and they're working so hard at getting better. You know, I think what I would probably say is being willing to do whatever it takes sometimes is one of the attitudes that I have found is most empowering for people, and a willingness to reframe your thought patterns, right? It's being willing to like look at every single aspect of yourself and give up that which no longer serves you. I think when we come in with, I'm never going to give up gluten, I don't care, or I'm always going to be a vegan, I don't care if as long as I can not eat meat because I believe in this very fervently, I'm going to do whatever it takes, but I'm not willing to look at that. Or I'm not going to look at my perfectionism, or I'm not going to look at my toxic relationship, right? Whatever it is, I find that the thing that people are most attached to is oftentimes the thing that is standing in between them and where they want to be. And so being open to the possibility that the things that you're most attached to are not necessarily the things that are serving you. and being willing to let go of those, and having curiosity and yeah, hope, I guess. But sometimes you come in without hope, and that's hopefully where we are helping, the practitioners are helping you get to the place where you can have hope.
Definitely. And I just, before we completely wrap everything up, I wanted to also make sure to address one of the things that you and I had discussed before, which is how we can modify our environment to our benefit when we're in these situations through something as simple as a water filter or an air filter, and why these things matter, because I know you've been doing some research on it. So I'd love if we could just kind of wrap up with like those lifestyle hacks that you can implement easily right now, and then we can dive into, you know, if people are wanting to reach out or to work with you more specifically.
Sure. You know, it's clean air, clean water, clean food. Most people know you got to eat organic, right? But then you have to start to look at what are the things that you're cooking your food in? Are you cooking in nonstick pans? Well, you gotta get rid of those, right? Um, are you wrapping everything in plastic when you put it in the refrigerator? So starting to pay attention and bring awareness to your um, your exposures on a daily basis. What are you drinking out of plastic water bottles? It's time to stop using those plastic water bottles. I was reading an article. Every time you screw the cap back on a plastic water bottle, you increase the microplastics in the water that you're drinking, which is already pretty high. And I think back to all the times that I've had a water bottle and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to screw the cap back on and save my water. Oh gosh. Yes, if you haven't heard the statistics yet, we ingest about a credit card size of microplastics and nanoplastics a week. A week, it's a lot. It's probably more than that, honestly. But and then, you know, you can look at your personal care products and get rid of all the junk. I love the app Yucca, Yuka. It's fantastic. It has a scanner. You can figure out very quickly what your personal care products are looking like. The fact that people still use dryer sheets and perfumed products is appalling to me because that's just a simple, easy hack that you got to throw out. I'm sorry, folks, there's a toxic phthalates, VOCs, God knows whether they're horrible chemicals are in there. And, you know, they're poisonous not only for you, but everyone you come in contact with. So get rid of those. In terms of air filters and water filters, actually, I just got a zero water filter and I'm playing around with that. Oh my gosh, it has a little detector. It's a total dissolved solutes in it. And so that's like the solids, the stuff that's in the water. My drinking water at home rated over a 500. Yikes, terrible water. And when you use the zero water filter, it takes it down to zero, which it's supposed to. And our filter only lasted 2 weeks because of all the stuff in the water. It's pretty tragic. So you may want to check out zero water filters so you can actually check your water, and then you have to change your filter very frequently. So if you're using a Brita or some other sort of a water with a small filter, it may not be doing much of anything. I had a very nice high-end water filter that I was using, and it was not any better than the water I was drinking out of the tap. So, and in terms of air filters, the majority of our toxic exposures are really coming from our homes, from the paints and the glues and the VOCs and our, you know, polyvinyl chloride floors, and you know, it's and then the dust, all the dust that accumulates, that's containing everything that we've walked through, all the pesticides. So we really need to keep our air clean, keep our homes clean, vacuum with a HEPA vacuum on a regular basis, ideally twice a week, and then use a good quality air filter. I like IQ Air, Air Doctors, things like that, that is going to get out all of the airborne toxicants, the volatile organic compounds, the formaldehyde. There's an air monitor called the Air Night 9-in-1. It's a cute little air monitor, and it looks at things like particulate matter. It tells temperature and humidity, but more importantly, total VOCs and formaldehyde. And then he's got there's a little guy with a face, and when he's happy, things are good, your toxic levels are low, and then you can start to see as he gets more and more unhappy, and then he starts crying when the total VOCs and the formaldehyde and the particulate matter is high. So you can tell, hey, things are good or not. Just a quick note, I did an experiment where I sprayed some hairspray, and I did it in the other room, and I came in to look at my little guy, and he turned yellow. He was not happy with that. And then the next day I tried spraying the hairspray right near him. Oh my gosh, he immediately started crying within about 10 seconds. But the good thing was I opened up the doors and the windows, got a cross breeze, and within a couple of minutes he was smiling and had cleared out the VOCs. So yeah, gotta throw out that hairspray.
You just listed so many helpful things for people, and that's why I always love ending with like really actionable items and things that are easy to do. So everything that she was just mentioning, just looking into an air filter and a water filter, that's like a plug and play, right? You do it once and then you forget about it until you got to change the filter in 3 months, 12 months, whatever. And the other thing that you can do is like sunrise, sunset walks. If you can get that beginning of the day and end of the day light, it actually starts to reset that rhythm that we were talking about at the beginning. And you can just do that, work on some deep breathing, maybe do it barefoot and do a little grounding, and you'd be amazed at how much you can start to regulate your body just with removing toxins from your environment and doing some of the natural things that we used to do before we had, you know, screens and lights late at night. And like we used to go to bed with the sun, like trying to start to wind down as the sun goes down, and just keeping those things in mind as you're working to reset your rhythm. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. We could talk about this forever, but I know some people had asked, like if they wanted to reach out to you or maybe work with you, where would you direct people if they wanted to learn more? I know you've done a lot of public speaking as well.
Yes, thank you. I have a brick and mortar practice in Southern California, thespringcenter.com, and then you can also find me at drkellymccann.com. Obviously, I'm at Dr. Kelly McCann on Instagram and Facebook, and I do have a webinar. Usually it's once or twice a month webinar series that I'm hosting as well that people can check out. And I would love to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone who wants to go ahead and feel free to message. You can click her name and message on Instagram, but usually the best place is just to go to the website. Can you repeat your website one more time?
Yes, thespringcenter.com. So Spring Center was taken. I had to put the in front of it.
Perfect.
Thespringcenter.com or drkellymccann.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. McCann. This was wonderful getting to chat with you. And, you know, if anyone is curious or you have questions, feel free to comment below. This will be posted on our feeds afterwards. You can ask us questions after. We're happy to answer. We do these to educate you and help you feel empowered about your health. And if you want to know more about any particular things, we can always do another one and talk about more advanced topics. So let us know what you want to learn. We're here for you. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christine.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.